This week on the show, we cover an article about rethinking OpenBSD security. We covered the FreeBSD 2020 Q1 status report in more detail. We have the notion about progress and user interfaces for you. We have a bit of a comments about Thomas E. Dickey's article on NetBSD curses. We have also making Unix a little bit more like Plan 9 with a couple more changes here and there. Then we have the not actually Linux distro review on Ars Technica for you and some more items in this week's episode of BSD Now. BSD Now, episode 347, New Directions. Recorded for the 22nd of April 2020. Hello, I'm your host, Benedikt Reuschling.
And I'm Alan Jude.
Welcome back to our episode of this week. I hope you're all doing well, hopefully at home and not too far out into the big wide world, as we all shelter at home just a little bit longer. And we will provide you with the distraction, let's say, and give you the latest news about the BSDs. And there's a couple of new headlines this week, and the first one is Rethinking OpenBSD Security.
So this is another great blog post by Ted Unix, and he says, OpenBSD aims to be a secure operating system. In the past few months, there were quite a few security erratas. However, that's not too unusual, but some of the recent ones were a bit special. One might even say bad. The OpenBSD approach to security has a few aspects, two of which might be avoiding errors and minimizing the risk of mistakes. Other people have other ideas about how to build secure systems. I think it's worth examining whether the OpenBSD approach works or if this is evidence that we're doomed to failure. I picked a few errata, not all of them, that were interesting and happened to suit my particular narrative. So the libc auth vulnerability. The auth function, which execs helpers without checking the argv, and he has links to the reports and the patches to fix it. He says, this is embarrassingly simple, yet probably not obvious in code review. In part, I think there's some confusion as to who is responsible for checking the inputs. You could look at any of the three components involved, the calling program itself, libc, or the login password function that's getting called, and reasonably conclude that someone else is doing the checks. In the end, I guess we've decided libc is at fault since that's where the patch went in. But that code doesn't look immediately wrong to me. The more interesting part of the story is that even with the libc bug, the login_password utility should not have been exploitable in this manner, except for some other bug. Back in 2001, login_password was rewritten to support Kerberos, and that is perhaps the real bug that was introduced. A request for challenge response auth, or think something like skey, should return authenticated instead of silence. Many years later, the Kerberos code was removed, but the refactor to support it remained, and so did the bug that was introduced. The bug wouldn't have been a complete non-issue, and there were some other related issues with the argv parsing. But the impact certainly would have been reduced had the Kerberos refactor have been thoroughly undone. So the argv parsing can be tricky to get right in a security context. A fair number of suggestions how to prevent problems wouldn't have helped. I'll note that the vuln popped up after fixing file names made the rounds again, but the leading dash has nothing to do with a file name. So he's talking about another blog post by D. Wheeler called Fixing Unix and Linux File Names. And then some of the other vulnerabilities that he was talking about, like ld.so, he says, naughty environment variables weren't removed in ld.so. Something that looks like a memory bug, except mostly not. It's tying the success of one operation, which is splitting environment variables, to the removing of that variable, getting a little ahead of ourselves. Advocates for various type systems, no doubt, believe that we would have handled these operations in the correct order, but I'm not sure that helps. The C code can't fail because it was missing error handling or failed to notice the allocation failure. And then there was the FTP bug. FTP would follow redirects to local files. the NetBSD FTP bug, where it could exec redirects in my go-to example of runaway features. The same bug, but with fortunately minor consequences, strikes again. But stay indoors, don't add features to your programs. So this one is basically a redirect on the FTP server, or the web server could redirect to a local file, causing you to read a file that you didn't mean to. And then there's the SMTPD from vulnerability. So SMPDD failed to validate some sender addresses. And there's, again, links to the report, the patch, and some commentary on it. He says, I think Giles's commentary covers most of this, but I'll recap some backstory. Long ago, everyone had their email stored in /var/mail in mbox files. This is problematic because there's a possibility of corruption if your mail user agent deletes an email while the mail delivery agent is delivering a new one, not to mention all the other problems like from mangling. So you need to lock the mbox file. But file locking isn't reliable over NFS. So you need lock files instead. But you need everyone to agree on a particular locking protocol. And while the mbox files are owned by the user, the directory is owned by root. So you need to exec a setuid helper to actually deliver to that mbox. Well, that's one problem. Another holdover from a long time ago is that the mail delivery agent program is configurable and may not just be a program, but might be a shell pipeline. People set their mail delivery agents to spam assassin pipe mail delivery agent, and that's not something you can just pass to execve. Some of that's probably not 100% accurate, but close enough. So he says there's a lot of historic complexity here, and it's unfortunately close to the surface. Mail delivery has a long history, and people built up very complex systems and workflows on top of that, which made building a drop-in replacement very difficult. Despite various levels of privilege separation, the less privileged processes are still mostly trusted by the parent, which runs as root. It will execute the commands and arguments that it receives. Avoiding this seems as simple as switching to using maildir, but that requires another change elsewhere. And the included mail user agent, mail, can't currently read maildir. Personally, I'd say this is long overdue, but mbox still works for some people, and the upgrade path is probably not fully transparent or automatic. Yeah, I'm definitely on board with maildir. Like, don't store your mail in something that's not maildir.
Yeah.
You want each email as a separate file because it just means that your whole mailbox never gets corrupted. And on things, if you have a good file system, it has a lot of advantages.
Oh, yes, for sure.
I don't generally do mail directly on the machine like that using the mail command line tool. But if people still do, someone should definitely just teach the mail command maildir support, and we can switch to that. That would be so much better.
Yeah, and we won't look back.
Generally, my mail is done via IMAP from a maildir. One more, and then the conclusion. I won't keep prattling on all day, but this is a really good article. So Ted goes on, the SMTPD read vulnerability. An out-of-bounds read in SMTPD, that's hard to say really quickly, could be leveraged into command execution. Again, report and patch linked. The real deal memory safety issue. By sending back some funny status lines, a remote SMTP server could inject commands into your SMTPD queue. When an email is queued for redelivery, SMTPD adds some information about the destination to its header so it knows which commands to run. In an attack similar to an HTTP request smuggling, if you can create a bounce with unexpected commands in the header, then SMTPD will execute when it attempts that redelivery. As above, one problem is that the most sensitive part of SMTPD is in very close proximity to the parts under attack. The most serious problem in this instance, I think, is that the SMTPD chose to store its own metadata in line with the email data. This makes parsing desync attacks possible. If the quota reply from the server being saved in a completely separate file from the one containing delivery instructions, the out-of-bounds read would have been mostly harmless. A lot of other mail servers do this. You end up with like 3 or 4 files for each mail sitting in the queue so that they can keep, stuff the attacker can control and stuff that the program controls in separate files. Anyway, this vulnerability stands out to me because I think the inherent danger of commingling data from different trust levels was never recognized, and it's clearly perilous. On to Ted's conclusions. The conclusion was, of course, preordained, but here we go anyway. I think several of these errata help demonstrate that principles like eliminating legacy interfaces and reducing complexity are vital to maintaining security. For the most part, the failure was in not following through, not because the principle itself was flawed or untenable. Some things slip through, but I'd argue not because the vigilance necessary is superhuman. There's danger here of providing useless advice like just don't make mistakes and get good. But I think the OpenBSD approach is more actionable than that. Even OpenBSD is subject to compromise for the sake of practicality, which is how some legacy designs stick around. So the lesson perhaps is to really stick with the principles that work and not just when convenient, but not always as easy. It's not always an easy choice to make. Of these three vulnerabilities, I'd classify as the most serious the auth and the two SMTPD ones. All were more or less exploitable only due to design issues beyond the original bug. They would have been just minor oopsies, which gave me the hope that we didn't always have to be perfect. Alas, it can be hard to identify design flaws in the abstract, and all of the parts of the system can look secure, but the weak points remain in the joinery as those secure parts connect together. Privilege separation is a key component of OpenBSD security, and inter-process communication is at the heart of it. More focus on what can go wrong with corrupted processes would help. Secure browsers are involving sandboxes, which require larger and larger exploit chains. SMTPD in particular is supposed to be secure against memory corruption in the network processes, but the ease with which a child can control the parent is pretty alarming. Only one errata strikes me as a vulnerability that would have been prevented by using a safer language. Yes, there's likely some programmatic idiom which I followed religiously may have helped in some cases, but I need more evidence to be convinced people would encode the relevant invariants by default. Writing a mail server is tricky business if you're constrained by designs that came before.
Oh, yes, for sure.
And yes, I think that's why email has been such a terror for so long, is that, no matter how new your mail server is, it's still got to do all the things that the old mail servers did.
Yeah, for compatibility and making sure you get the message from these clients.
Right. Well, it's more because you need to hook up to the anti-spam systems that were designed to hook into the other things and so on.
Yeah, it's not just mail delivery. It's also a whole lot of other things. Yeah, very nice article indeed by Ted Unix. And our next item is also a longer piece because the FreeBSD 2020 Q1 status report has been released with many entries from different teams and projects. So it's definitely a good thing to cover. And it shows, that in this case, the FreeBSD project is busy with different things, although you don't see them very often. But these status reports give the people that are working on them a chance to show their work and ask for feedback or just give you an update on what's new, what's coming up. Let's see. Oh, the introduction is always it's always new, and there's always someone different writing it. So it starts with "Welcome to the quarterly reports of the future." Well, at least at the first quarterly report from 2020, the new timeline mentioning in the last three reports still holds, which brings us to this report, which covers the period of January 2020 to March 2020. And as you will see in this report, we'd had quite an active quarter with big changes to both kernel, userland, documentation, ports, and third-party projects in the form of everything from bug and security fixes over to new features to speed improvements and optimizations. As this report also covers the start of the epidemic, it's also interesting to note that a quick glance at the subversion logs reveal that there has been no overall drop in the number of source commits, that docs commits have also stayed constant, and that ports have seen an upwards trend even. So we hope that all of you you and yours are safe, as can be managed, and that we get through this together by working together. Very nice introductory words. So we have different reports. The first block of reports is the team reports from the foundation, the core team, the release engineering team, cluster administration, continuous integration, ports collection teams, and the graphics team status reports.
Yes, quite a few different status reports.
Yeah.
Like we said, there's an overview from the foundation looking at what they've been working on, a mix of foundation stuff, partnerships and commercial user support, fundraising efforts, and also an overview of their OS improvements. They say over the first quarter of 2020, there were 273 commits to the FreeBSD base system repository tagged as sponsored by the FreeBSD Foundation, about 12% of the commits over that quarter. Many of these are part of sponsored or staff projects, including Edmast, Konstantin Belousov, Mark Johnson, Li Wen, Hu, etc., as they support the project. And there's some detail on what each of them is working on, and more updates on the continuous integration stuff and the support for the FreeBSD infrastructure, including the cluster admin team and so on. Then the FreeBSD core team has its status update, mostly issuing new commit bits to a bunch of people. The release engineering team has worked on the schedules for 11.4 and 12.2 releases. Cluster admin team stood up new mirrors, including one in South Africa and one in Seattle. And they, at the time, were working on new mirrors in Malaysia, Brazil, and Amsterdam. The one in Amsterdam came online today. I threw that switch this morning before the show. So if you were in Europe and your package downloads were a bit slow, they probably won't be anymore.
Excellent.
As we've deployed the new machine that's got something like 6 or 8x as many IOPS and 10 times as much bandwidth and so on.
Ooh, nice. That's great.
And yeah, it should help quite a bit.
So yeah, cool. Sometimes you don't see these people doing the work behind the scenes, but if things like mirrors are down, then people are kind of like noticing. But so even more good that we have these people working on that. So thanks for this team and their work they're doing. There's updates and status reports from the continuous integration team. They have also been busy, like making all these changes integrate, like Clang LLD toolchain and being putting Cure into the base. RISC-V jobs are now generating full disk images and run tests in QEMU.
Because I think, they're running the Linux test something to test our Linux emulation layer on AMD 64, more tests for PowerPC 64, and lots of other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to help out with that, there is a FreeBSD-testing mailing list, and they're grateful for more help.
Yeah, many of these entries have like work in progress or how you can contact us if you want to help out. And if you have a bit of spare time or can share your expertise in certain areas, then definitely get in touch with these people.
And then the ports team had their update. During the last quarter, the number of ports settled around 39,000. There are currently 2,400 open PRs, of which only 640 are not assigned to someone yet. Over the first quarter of 2020, they saw 8,146 commits by 173 different committers, plus 357 commits by 52 committers to the quarterly branch. They also gave out a bunch of commit bits so that team will continue to grow, and we can keep up with all of the applications that keep having new versions and new applications and so on. On the infrastructure side, they've also added new uses flags and removed some old ones. They're in the process of removing some of the Python 2.7 stuff from the ports tree, and that means that things that rely on Python 2 will need to be updated or deprecated. And then the big one was, after a long period of work by a large team of people, Xorg in the ports tree has been updated from 1.18 to 1.20. Also, web browser's been updated, Firefox 75 and Firefox ESR 68, and Chromium version 80 were there. Of course, this only covers to the end of March, so there's probably even newer stuff now. And the package manager was updated to 1.13.2. And I think 1.14 is out already in the
repository?
The main branch, yep. And also, Antoine ran 29 different exp runs, which is basically running the build of the entire ports tree against a patch to make sure that patch doesn't break things. they were testing updates to KDE and Poplar, changes to the package tools itself, and some other build stuff. And then, as we talked about, testing compatibility with various source changes, including removing the procfs-based debugging features, fixing thread local storage alignment, and also possibly only including the libSSP non-shared archive on i386 and Power architectures, not on newer ones.
Okay.
The other big team update is from the FreeBSD graphics team, which mostly is responsible for the graphics driver and the Xorg stack on top of that. So that team reports the FreeBSD X11 graphics team maintains the low levels of the FreeBSD graphics stack. This includes the actual graphic drivers, the graphic libraries like Mesa and OpenGL, and the Xorg server itself and its related libraries and applications. And now they're even extending into Wayland and its related libraries and applications. The biggest highlight by far during the previous quarter was the long-awaited update of Xorg-server to version 1.20. After years of work by many people, this update finally landed in the form of Xorg-server 1.20.7. With this update came a couple of new things, most notably FreeBSD 12 and later was switched to using the new udev/evdev backend by default for handling input devices, such as your mouse and keyboard. Together with this release, the OpenGL library implementation of Mesa was switched to use DRI3 instead of the older DRI2, so that's updated as well. These updates caused some fallout when they were first committed, most notably issues with keyboards, but with help from Michael Gemlin and others on the mailing list, most issues were sorted out pretty quickly. Unfortunately, version 304 of the NVIDIA graphics driver is no longer supported as of this release. So if you have a graphics card that is so old is not supported by the current old long-term support driver, then you might need a new graphics card. But that, I think, is only 12-year-old and older graphics cards or something like that. Apart from this update, there's also been ongoing work to keep the various DRM KMod ports and packages up to date, mostly in response to changes in FreeBSD's currents API and also in security issues found in the Intel i915 driver. And they also have regular bi-weekly meetings, and I think the notes for those go up on the FreeBSD-meetings repo on GitHub. And if you're interested, they offer links to their mailing list, their Gitter chat, and their IRC chat.
So thanks for the graphics folks and their efforts in this area. Then we have projects in the report. So there is an entry for NFS over the TLS implementation. In an effort to improve the NFS security, an internet draft, which they expect will become an RFC soon, specifies the use of TLS 1.3 to encrypt all the data traffic on a Sun RPC connection, which NFS uses. And so this is an exciting and desirable project. And Rick Macklem is working on that, who's doing most of the NFS in FreeBSD. And he writes that work is still needed to be done for the case where the NFS client is expected to have a signed certificate. But in particular, it is not obvious to him that the current solution is for clients that do not have a fixed IP address or DNS name. The code now is about ready for testing, but requires that the kernel TLS be able to support receive as well as transmit. Patches to the kernel TLS for receive are being worked on by John Baldwin and probably others. And once the receive side kernel TLS becomes available, the code in Subversion will need third-party testing and a secure evaluation by someone familiar with TLS.
Basically, this will be able to use the in-kernel TLS that FreeBSD got from Netflix to do high-speed encryption of NFS. So apparently the kernel RPC has been modified to do start TLS RPC and to do the up calls to user space daemons that perform the SSL validation and so on. So it actually looks like a nice design and means, you can have encrypted NFS without having to do Kerberos and all that extra nonsense. Very good work. I'm looking forward to being able to play with that. Then Brooks has a quick update on QA, the testing framework. So historically, QA has been installed from the ports collection. While this is fine for mainstream architectures, it can pose a bootstrapping issue for new architectures, and package installation is quite slow under emulation or on an FPGA. So by including it in the FreeBSD-based system, we can avoid these issues. We hope that this inclusion will spur testing of embedded platforms and simplify the process of testing in continuous integration, since you won't have to pull in QL from ports. I think there's a kind of related thing that FreeBSD project has forked Lua to get it out from underneath the Google contributor license agreement, so that changes can be merged without having to sign a CLA.
Oh, okay.
Related to the CI testing we talked about of the Linux, the LTP test suite, Edward Naparala has been working on Linux compatibility layer updates. So work during the quarter focused on source code cleanup and making it easier to debug missing features. There were, however, some user visible changes, including adding support for the TCP_cork option that's used by Nginx, adding support for map_32-bit flag for mmap, which fixes some monobinaries when you're using the Ubuntu repos, and a fix for DNS resolution with libc versions newer than 2.30, which affected CentOS 8. So currently there are still over 400 of the Linux test suite tests that fail. And if you're interested in digging into a couple of those and helping whittle that number down, do please get in touch.
Mm-hmm. Very good.
And Mark Johnson and Michael Tuxen have been using syscaller, which is a syscall fuzzing tool to fuzz the FreeBSD system and find different bugs. And thanks to Backtrace.io for sponsoring that and the FreeBSD Foundation. And they say a number of kernel bugs have been found by syscaller and fixed this quarter, mostly in the network stack and the file descriptor table code. Bug investigations have led to improvements in debugging facilities and assertions. For example, in the SCTP stack, syscaller reproducers have also been used or added to Peter Holmes' Stress2 suite, helping ensure that regressions are found quickly. The syscaller instance hosted by Backtrace.io has been very useful in testing syscaller improvements and finding bugs. Though Google runs a dedicated syscaller instance targeting FreeBSD, it has proved fruitful to run multiple instances since they end up building different corpuses and thus discovering different bugs, but also finding the overlap, which can help you decide if a report is actually a bug more quickly. Support for fuzzing a number of new system calls has been added, including the new copy file range and the real path at syscalls, as well as a bunch of the other capsicum syscalls. Some work was also done to audit existing system call definitions to ensure that FreeBSD specific extensions to POSIX system calls are actually covered. Work is ongoing to target the Linux emulation layer as well, and to collect kernel dumps so that one-off crashes with no reproducers might still have a chance of being debugged.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the kernel, Christoph Provost has been working on the bridge driver. And it says the current implementation of if bridge uses a single mutex to protect its internal data structures. As a result, there's nowhere near as fast as it could be. This is relevant to users who want to run many VNet jails or virtual machines bridged together. As part of this project, several new tests have been added to the if bridge code. They're generally very useful for validating any locking changes and will also help prevent regressions in future changes. So those tests now live under user test sysnet if bridge test. The current work is concentrating on investigating if it's possible to leverage the concurrency kit epoch code for the data path in order to make bridges much faster. And I think the answer is yes. In the testing he did on I think it was a 6-core 3 gigahertz machine, so a Xeon class server, he saw packets per second pass through the bridge go from like 4 million to 18 million or something like that.
That's a significant improvement.
Yes, so quite a big improvement there. And then Konstantin Belousov worked on SIG fastblock, and Mark Johnson worked on ARM64 large system extension atomic instructions and improving those. The team at Microsoft worked on the FreeBSD on Microsoft Hyper-V and Azure stuff. There's some updates there. The team at Cambridge, including Robert Watson, John Baldwin, Brooks Davis, Ruslan Buchan, and Andrew Turner, worked on the ARM Morello platform, which is going to be the hardware platform for the Capability Hardware Enhanced RISC Instructions, or CHERI, which is a new high-security CPU that will run FreeBSD specifically. It'll be the first OS for it and everything. So there's a big update on that if you're interested. Also, work to support the NXP ARM64 system on a chip and a bunch of its devices. Updates on the Elastic Network Adapter for FreeBSD running in Amazon to handle 100 gigabit per second traffic. And then there's updates from the PowerPC team, the RISC-V team, and I guess one of the biggest bits of news, actually, is that GCC 4.2.1 has been retired from FreeBSD finally.
Woohoo!
So as of February 29th, 2020, it has been deleted.
Forever.
So back in 2007, the GNU compiler collection, GCC, migrated to using GPL v3, which prompted discussions about the future of the FreeBSD toolchain, because up to that time we were using GCC, but it was under the GPL v2, and that was kind of okay. So we held the Toolchain Summit back at BSDCan in 2010, and Roman Devaki gave an update on the Clang BSD project, which is a project to start building FreeBSD using the new and rapidly improving Clang compiler. And over the last 10 years, Clang has imported into FreeBSD-based system and made more and more widely used. First, by being installed as a not default CC and eventually becoming the default for everything. GCC 4.2.1 was kept in the tree for a few FreeBSD targets that had migrated to Clang, such as MIPS and SPARC64. But early on in 2020, all remaining targets had either migrated to an external toolchain using like GCC 9 or something from ports, or had been deprecated and removed, like SPARC64. So now that there are no in-tree consumers for GCC, it was removed in commit 358454. And if there was a BSD can, there definitely would have been a cake for the deletion of GCC.
There was much rejoicement, yeah.
Yep, and I guess related to another recent discussion, the elfctl utility has been introduced on FreeBSD, which allows you to, per binary, control some of the security mitigations that FreeBSD supports. So it allows you to disable things like ASLR, the mmap protmax, the stack gap, or WXRX on a per binary basis. I remember when it was first introduced, we talked about how you can do that on OpenBSD by setting a specific flag on the file system when you mount it, saying anything in this file system doesn't have to do WXRX. With this elfctl, you can control it as a per binary note in the elf header.
Yeah, so there's much more in there, and many of the reports have more details in them, much more than we could cover here.
Yeah, there's, for example, ports. There's updates on KDE, XFCE, Wine, Go, the sysctl mib info, and then for documentation, there's a status update from the translation team. They've got 10 different languages on the go now, which is really nice.
Mm-hmm.
There's also someone working on a FreeBSD man page overhaul, making sure the history and standard sections of a lot of those man pages are updated. That's really nice. And then there's also third-party projects, including POT and Nomad drivers, Nomad BSD itself, and so on.
Mm-hmm. So we definitely recommend you read the whole report and dive into individual sections that are of interest.
We went over it for 20 minutes and barely scratched the surface.
Yeah. So definitely give a shout out to all the people that are have helped, well, first of all, do these projects and status reports, and also the people who compiled them into one big piece. All right, time for the news roundup this week. We have the notion of progress and user interfaces for you. So this is an article on Here Be Sea Swines. They write that the notion of progress and user interfaces. One trait of modern Western culture is the notion of progress, a view claiming at large everything is getting better and better. How should we think about progress, both in general and regarding technology? In some areas, the claim of progress arguable is true. We have good reasons to complain about the state of democracy, but we still acknowledge that more people than ever in history have food and water and access to education, medicine, and basic health care. Yep. Current crisis notwithstanding. We have good reasons to be worried about the implications of technology, social media, a sedentary war of life, but we just the same have good reasons to see how much good technology has done and is doing. Especially when thinking about the web, we should get better at thinking of the state in dialectical terms as a balance where good and bad will always be present, and the aim is to keep the weight and the tipping point on the right side. What is progress and what is not is a very complicated question. When we speak about software applications, we're not naive than in other areas. This is at least the feeling of the author here. A little further down is, but how about how we use computers? How about our user interfaces? Is it true we're making progress? I don't know. Microsoft and Apple made the graphical user interface mainstream, influenced by ideas from the Xerox PARC, but some say important aspects were lost and forgotten in this process. Most notable Alan Kay, but also the modern UX genius Brett Victor. If you only know the standard history written and have recollections from your youth in the 90s and remember Windows 3.1, you will be surprised to have a small talk interface from 1976 resemble this very, very closely or not too far.
Mm-hmm.
So they talk a little bit about why not Acme on Plan 9. There's an applications link to a tour of applications where you can see some differences and some things that they do in the Plan 9. More and more, when they think about this, without doubt, the improvements of our applications, generation by generation, some workflows and aspects of applications are more primitive and worse than those of the Unix system in the 1970s in environments like those of Xerox PARC. While features improve, they sometimes get the feeling that overall philosophy of applications and the implicit consequence of this philosophy and how it materializes in concrete GUIs today all too often are commercialized. And they talk about some more about, GUI synergies and, if interfaces resemble each other, a new user immediately can start using the interface. And yeah, it's an interesting article.
Well, it's also interesting how we tend to be moving away from applications to just everything's a web browser. Or, if you do get an application, it's just a bundled web browser specialized for that one site.
Yeah, it's very true today. And so they close down with a quote at the bottom from Douglas Adams. We are stuck with technology when what we really want is just stuff that works. Yeah, so definitely recommend reading that. It's a nice brain picking about, is that really a good UI for me or nowadays?
Yeah, there's quite a bit more to that article. So if you're interested in looking at what the UIs could have been and how they're developing and so on, do check it out.
Mm-hmm.
So next, we have a blog post from, I don't know if this is not from Thomas's blog, but a recent post about NetBSD curses by Thomas Dickey. I was recently pointed at a web page on Thomas Dickey's site talking about NetBSD curses. It seems initially that the page was intended to be a pointer to some differences between N curses and NetBSD curses, and does appear to start off in this vein, but it seems that the author has lost the plot at the document evolved, and in the tail end it seems to be devolving into some sort of slagging match.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to go through Mr. Dickey's document point by point. That would be tedious, but I would like to pick out some of the things that I believe to be the most egregious. He says, please note that even though I am a NetBSD developer, the opinion below are my own and not that of the NetBSD project. I guess the first thing that Thomas Dickey did to peeve the author of this blog post is not be able to spell their name correctly. I know that always starts me off on the wrong foot, too.
To continue reading? Lots
of feedback emails that we've gotten over the years with my name spelled a variety of different ways. Anyway, so they want to start with some background on how they got started working on the NetBSD version of curses. Originally, I was using a commercial x86 port of System 5 Unix on my home PC, but started looking elsewhere when I found that the SLIP implementation was buggy. At the time, Linux had no networking at all, but the BSD source code had just been ported to the PC in the project known as 386BSD. Since this had networking, I picked this up and then switched to NetBSD early on. Being used to a System 5 curses, I was disappointed to find that there was no real way to handle cursor and function keys in a terminal-independent manner as there is in a System 5 curses system. I developed and submitted a patch to the NetBSD curses library that added support for the keypad function and modified the getCharacter function to perform the conversion of key sequences into key symbols. It was on the basis of this patch that I was offered the opportunity to become a NetBSD developer. Later, when working on NetBSD curses, my overall philosophy has been to follow the single Unix specification version 2, x/open curses, issue 4, volume 2, which they'll just refer to as susv2 from now on to avoid having to write all that out. If a behavior is undefined, then I took to n curses and matched the behavior there, if appropriate, on the basis that this normally results in less issues for someone porting an application. I added netcurses extensions in response to problem reports as well. Let's now have a look at Mr. Dickey's comments, and he goes through talking about things like the window structure opaque. I don't apologize for what I did. I believe that the fact that the window pointer was available for applications to poke at is a violation of the software layering and was just wrong. And anyway, there's quite a few points in there. So if you're interested, you can read the link to the original Thomas Dickey post and then the response from NetBSD here that goes on and has quite a few examples.
Yeah, that's the proper reading order. So to know about these issues, you should have to read the original article first.
But interesting.
It's definitely, good to know about these things and reading the discussion that's ensuing. Then, while we were on the subject of Plan 9, we have making Unix a little more Plan 9-like. So this is over at woozle.org. They write that they're not really interested in defending anything. They tried out Plan 9 port and liked it, but they have to live in Unix land. Here's how I set that up. They start with a warning, of course. The Sockless community and some of the Plan 9 communities are dominated by jackasses. I hope that's strong enough wording to impress the severity. Don't go into IRC for help. Stay off the Sockless email client. The software is great, but the people who write it are well-spoken and well-reasoned, but for some reason the fandom is horrible to everyone. Okay, with that warning aside, they have a section on the Xterm. So here's a couple of configuration things you can do, it turns out. For Xterm, that has some really cool ideas, but Unix has a long history of using graphical terminals, and lots of stuff needs VT220. 22.0. Xterm is a good compromise. So you can make the Xterm scroll bar and all other Athena scroll bars for that matter prettier with a couple of X resources entries. So this is your X resources file. And they provide a couple of things like how to change the scroll bar thickness and foreground and background colors. Or you can also swap the left and right mouse buttons, and so to be more like Acme and 9term. So that's configuration section. Then they have a section about 9WM. They're not maintaining the 9WM window manager, they write, but if you like Rio, you should give it a well. There are some differences you might prefer, and there's a link to 9WM. Then they talk a bit about SSHFS. As a non-root user, you can mount remote file systems locally with SSHFS. It's probably as close as Unix is going to get for a while, and it's not awful. Then the Plan 9 LM command is great. It's like apropos or man-k, but it outputs lines so you can copy and paste into a prompt to pull up the page. And they provide a script to do just that. And then they have a section about XDG Open and Mon. So XDG Open is also a little bash, or not bash script, shell script, of course. This is the current Linux notion of how to do things like the plumber. Just about every modern program calls out to it to open files, and it uses whichever one is first in your path, so you can make a little script to do what you want and avoid having to configure all of the weirdo files in /.config. And for Mon, Russ Cox uses a program called Mon to watch files and run them whenever they change. It's like watch on Linux, I guess. This is pretty handy for iterative debugging, so you don't have to keep rerunning your program every time you save and compile. And they have a start of a similar script that does just that, which can be improved, they write. Yeah, so these are a couple of changes so that your non-Plan 9 Unix is a little bit more Plan-like. Then we have a bigger article from Ars Technica. A couple of people have probably seen this. Not actually Linux distro review FreeBSD 12.1 release.
Yeah, I think this is part of a series at Ars Technica about Linux reviews. So this is by Jim Salter, who's written a bunch of articles about ZFS and stuff recently as well. So basically, he goes through trying out FreeBSD He did get bit by that recent change in Xorg, meaning he had to change his sysctl so that his mouse would work. That's been fixed in head now, and will be fixed in 12.2, but that soured his experience a little bit. But he's got some good points about kind of newbie issues he ran into. Jim was a FreeBSD user for a long time, but switched away to Linux many, many years ago. So he has some vague memories about how things were, and sometimes that's actually actively unhelpful, as it were.
Yeah, it kind of influenced the article a little bit, and
Well, it's more that, like, if you remember how things used to be, it's like, yeah, but it's not like that anymore.
Yeah, sure. You need to look at the current system and what it provides. There's a healthy comment section as well, with a lot of people commenting on the actual article, but definitely worth a read to kind of see what things are in the eyes of a newbie or someone who's coming back to the system. All right, time for the Beastie Bits this week. We have a few articles here and items that are of interest to you. The first one is from NetBSD's blog about the Wi-Fi renewal restart, which sounds exciting, and it actually is.
Yep, so it says, back in 2018, Phil Nelson started a long-needed Wi-Fi refresh, basically syncing the source sys net 802.11 directory with the version from FreeBSD. He got a few things working, but then ran out of time and wasn't able to spend enough time on it to complete the task. So now, I think this is Martin Husman is taking over this work, and Phil hopes to join in later this summer. The main idea is to get better SMP locking support for newer and faster Wi-Fi standards, and support for virtual access points, while all making future updates and the import of drivers from FreeBSD easier. I have collected quite a few Wi-Fi cards and USB dongles, but will ask for help with other hardware I don't have handy. I hope to have a working setup and a few working drivers by the end of the couple of months that they're getting funded by the NetBSD Foundation. For the curious, the first drivers they're hoping to work on are the URTWN, RUN, ATHN, and WI, followed by things other developers can convert and have hardware for, possibly including some more Realtek 802.11ac stuff, some Pinebook Wi-Fi, the QB Truck, and the Guru plug.
Okay. We'll watch this space and we'll report on any new developments in this space. So a lot of people require the Wi-Fi to be working and fast enough. But seems like NetBSD is restarting efforts here. Very good. Then we have an update about Dragonfly BSD, that their environment quick start section now has a section on Hammer 2, so you can see how to set that up, and with a couple of examples.
Yeah, so this is this document describes the Dragonfly environment one will find on a newly installed system. While you are getting started, please pay careful attention to the version or level of Dragonfly that the document was written for. And yes, there's now a Hammer 2 section about Hammer 2 pseudo file systems. Saying in Hammer 2, the file system is typically mounted by its default label. There's no distinction between this pseudo file system and others you might have created. You can create additional pseudo file systems, or you can snapshot an existing PFS and specify a new PFS name for that snapshot. In Hammer 2, all snapshots must be independently mounted. In addition, Hammer 2 snapshots are writable entries, and you can use them just as you would the original file system. Hammer 2 does not do automatic history, snapshotting, or undo. You have to snapshot a file system manually using the Hammer 2 utility.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And the next item has Kamil Rytarowski. Hopefully that's the right pronunciation. So since Asia BSDCon 2020 didn't happen, but the papers were already written, so Kamil thought, well, why not upload this and give this paper to the public so people can read it? And that's what this item is. Engineering NetBSD 9.0 is the title. And there's a bit of a timeline and top active committers on the first page. So this is really a good overview about the engineering efforts that go into the NetBSD project in this case, that are probably not as well viewed or not as publicly seen sometimes. So this is a good behind-the-scenes look into how the project works and, what kind of efforts are done to actually make a release and what kind of different developments they focus on. So this should have been a presentation, of course, but since the conference didn't happen because of the coronavirus, we just have the PDF, but it has all the information required to kind of make a sense of what this is all about. Then we have a video on YouTube about the antivirus protection using OpenSense plugins.
So if you're using OpenSense as your router and you want to have it do some malware filtering with ClamD, then this video is for you.
Speaking of canceled conferences, or conference happen in a different format this year, the BSD Can Home Lab panel recording session is announced. That's probably what you are doing. So since the conference will not happen in a physical space, we're going online, and you will do a recording session for that specific Home Lab panel, which people have looked forward to, by the way. So this is a panel. BSD Can didn't have many panels, but they tried one this year, and it seems popular.
Well, yes, that was my intent was to fix that. But
yeah.
Well, the plan for most talks is that the speaker will record the talk and we'll post it. For the panel to work well, we kind of need the live audience interaction and so on. So our plan is that the four of us that will make up the panel are going to host it as a live event on May 5th at 2 p.m. So the normal time we do the live broadcast of BSD Now, but on a Tuesday instead of Wednesday. So May 5th at 2 p.m. Eastern, which is 1800 UTC. It'll be over at live.freebsd.org/bsdcan/BSD Home Lab or something like that. The link, just go to live.freebsd.org and click BSD Can and Home Lab. And that'll have the live stream in the chat room. And hopefully people can ask us questions as we talk in the panel. Watch this space. Hopefully we'll have an email address for people that can send questions if you're not going to be able to make the live stream and so on. Just got to finish getting all that organized.
Oh, great. Who are the panelists again?
The panelists will be myself, Michael W. Lucas, Nicholas Seising, and Michael Dexter.
Ah, good. That's a nice group of people.
Yes. Well, and we wanted to be able to cover everything from like, what do you have to do to have your partner not have a problem with you having a home lab through like your home lab is a couple of spare laptops versus your home lab is a rack full of machines in a basement, which, not everybody can have that. And so we tried to get a good cross section. And we also tried to make sure, when we give hardware advice, we can also cover what about if you live in Europe and so on.
Yeah, different perspectives, different approaches also. Yeah, that will certainly be interesting to a lot of people because I guess most people have more than one computer at home and more people keep accumulating these. And that's kind of nice to see people who have done this before.
Right. But, if you are going to do a home lab, what drives do I buy? What switches work well? Which NICs actually work with FreeBSD and don't cost $300? And yeah, I'm going to try to cover a lot and answer questions.
Okay, very good. Yeah, I will try to make that. And if not, then I will watch the recording. Okay, so now we have something to announce to you, which is not what we do every day or every show, but, times change and, we might as well get the word out so that people can know about it and make adjustments if necessary.
So in podcast news, we have a bit of an update. BSD Now will be going independent next month. After being part of Jupiter Broadcasting since we started back in 2013, BSD Now is now going to move off to be independent. We extend a very large thank you to Jupiter Broadcasting for hosting us all this time, and for Linux Academy, making it possible for us to bring you over 100 episodes with no advertisements. But Linux Academy is under new leadership now, and we understand that cutbacks need to be made, especially in the current economic conditions, and BSD is not their core product. But this does not mean that your favorite BSD podcast is going away. As a listener, you probably won't notice much of a difference at all. The big thing we will mention is make sure that your subscription to bsdnow.tv, like the RSS feed, is the one from bsdnow.tv rather than the Jupiter Broadcasting all shows feed or something, so that you will continue to get the new episodes delivered to your podcatcher or whatever.
Right. We still do the weekly one, so in case you don't see any new updates on your podcast subscription, then you might as well check out our website. It's still bsdnow.tv and update it from there. So we will definitely produce more, and again, weekly episodes. It's just different things that we do now. We do a podcast as we did before, and we had a couple of people behind it to do some of the cutting and editing work. We still have that as well in the independent world, that I would say. So nothing big will change for you.
Yeah. So the biggest thing is just make sure you keep getting the show by making sure that you subscribe via bsdnow.tv, not one of the Jupiter Broadcasting feeds that will stop updating next month.
Yeah, thanks to all the Jupiter Broadcasting and Linux Academy folks who, have been with us and supported us and made all the changes that you normally wouldn't see behind the scenes, whether it's website updates or the cutting and audio editing. So that's been a great partnership from my point of view. And
yeah, when we started the show, with neither Chris Moore nor I had any of the ability to edit the video or any of that, or the audio or any of it. And so being able to use the infrastructure from Jupiter Broadcasting made it possible for us to do the podcast. And then over time, Linux Academy made the show even better with better audio editing and all that. But in the end, as a listener of the show, you shouldn't notice much of a difference at all. Just make sure that the URLs where you get the show from are the correct ones so that they continue to work.
Exactly. So you're not too surprised. All right. Now it's time for our regular feedback and questions section this week. We have moved our feedback and questions to a more stable location on GitHub, so that they don't get lost by any kind of accident. Of course, they could also get lost by GitHub, and then there's more things lost, or more important things lost, I would say, than people submit stuff to us. But nevertheless, we have them in a new location, and you can find it there. Of course, they won't change much on GitHub, but it's a location where you can find them easier, and they don't go away too quickly. And we always collect new feedback on feedback@bsdnow.tv about the show, any questions you might have, and this is the first we got this week from Jordan about ZFS pool, of a ZFS pool problem in particular. They write, "Hey, I have a ZFS pool that consists of a single RAID Z1 VDEV with 3 4TB disks in it. I recently put some more RAM in the machine that I use as a NAS, which is a running CentOS 8. Before I knew it, I was getting checksum errors on all 3 drives. I shut off the system and took out the new RAM as soon as I saw them, but it was in the 300s already. Ooh. Now my pool won't import with an error message of corrupted metadata. I've enabled ZFS debug messaging, and the main issue is checksum error equal 55 or E-bad-E. I've tried importing it with -fx as a last resort, but it just says one or more devices unavailable. I've also tried using a patch from one of the ZFS on Linux devs, or to disable the transaction group restriction on rewinds and using capital T to rewind to an earlier transaction group, but it didn't work as well. Attached to the email is a copy of the ZFS debug log from whenever I try to import the pool. Anything you can do to help will be greatly appreciated, as my backups are lacking. Thanks in advance."
Well, if you can't rewind to an older transaction group, there's possibly not that much that can be done. I've only encountered a situation like this once, and it was my own fault, where I had a pool imported twice. Long story. Shouldn't have been able to happen, but preponderance of errors caused the same pool to be imported with 2 different names on the same machine. And so then they were scribbling over top of each other's Uber blocks and so on. In the really, really limited implementation of ZFS that the FreeBSD bootloader uses, I was able to read a couple of files, but not very many. Using that, I was hoping I could find the right transaction group to rewind to, but I never did figure it out. Luckily, nothing important was on that pool, and so I just reformatted and reinstalled the system. I think I managed to get the SSH private key off so that it wouldn't alarm everybody when they logged into the box again. But that was the only thing that was really unique to that machine, so it was okay. In your case, yeah, your best bet is to continue to work with the ZFS and Linux devs and see what can happen.
Yeah. Do you think that was caused by the faulty memory chips you put in, or?
It's hard to say. It would probably not be that consistent.
With all 3 drives?
Like, more of a problem with a bit of RAM is not likely to cause hundreds and hundreds of errors. Like, the computer would likely crash long before you'd be able to corrupt that much of the pool, honestly. It's hard to say.
Yeah.
Anything is theoretically possible. Sadly, there's not much help that I can offer. This problem is a little deeper in the guts of ZFS than I normally venture to.
Yeah, the only thing that we can say is don't trust your pool, but make backups. Or even though there's a lot of protections in ZFS, you still need to have backups of your pool just in case.
Yes, like has been said many times, RAID is not a backup.
Yeah, sorry that this happened to you, and hopefully you can get some of your files back with the help of some of the ZFS developers. That pretty much wraps up this episode, and we hope that you liked this one, and keep sending us feedback if you have interesting things found on the web about the BSDs, and then we hope you listen to us next week as always.
Yep, thank you. See you next week.